Not only a modern performance icon, but likely the last of a dying breed of German 6-speed manual do-it-yourself sports sedans.
So we're going to start today's review with the beating heart of the G80 M3, the S58 twin turbo inline 6. It's an all aluminum head, all aluminum block, and it's the evolution of the B58 motor that came out for the G20 generation BMW 3 Series. All right, let's get some performance numbers for the S58 inline 6 motor in the G80 M3.
So this bad boy has 476 German horsepower and 406 pound-feet of torque.
Car and Driver measured a 3.9 second 0 to 60 time and a 12.2 second quarter mile time. Now that's with the rear-wheel drive 6-speed manual configuration, which this car is. The competition variants, both in all-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive form, do a good half second or 1 second faster 0 to 60 time for the competition all-wheel drive models. Now, although those cars are a little bit faster, I would argue they don't offer the same overall experience as the manual transmission G80 M3. Let's talk a little bit about the G80's styling. That was probably one of the most controversial factors when this car first launched for the 2021 model year. And the biggest part of that was these big snarl-nosed kidney grills. Now, BMW over the last couple years, their design language has kind of followed larger and larger kidney grills. This car was kind of a trendsetter for that, which if you've been a BMW fan for very long, you may not be used to that sort of styling or may not be a fan of it. Now, it hasn't grown on me yet in the last 10,000 miles or so of having this car. I'm still not a big fan of the front end. Coming from an F80 M3 and an F90 M5, I feel like both of those cars offer better styling from the front, but that's just a preference. I know a lot of folks actually tend to like the front end design of this car. Now, if you walk around the side, in my opinion, the side profile of this car is excellent. Has just the right spacing between the front of the windshield and the front of the car. It has perfectly molded wheel arches that tend to cover the tires very nicely. So this particular car has the upgraded wheel options with 19-inch wheels in the front and 20-inch wheels in the rear, with a stagger between a 275 tire, which is a massive front tire akin to like the new Dark Horse Mustang or something like that. Very good for a track setup. And then in the rear, we have a 285 rear tire, like I said, on a 20-inch rim. These rims, in my opinion, are the best rims that are offered on the G80 M3. Let us know what you think in the comments about those if you tend to like them. I've also been a really big fan of the Pirelli P0 tires versus the Michelin Pilot Supersport tires I've had on many of my other M cars in the past. Now, there's no sunroof on this car. This one has the all carbon fiber roof, which actually, being 6'3", I'm a big fan of sitting in the car because it gives me that extra little bit of headroom. It also looks beautiful and it complements, I think, very well the Dravit Gray exterior of this car, which, if you're not familiar with Dravit Gray, it has some green and gray metallic in it, and it really looks good depending on how the sun hits it. Not the color that I would have picked for this car if I was ordering it, but over the last 10,000 miles of having the car, it has grown on me, and I feel like is a really nice color option for a masculine looking G80 M3. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the rear end styling on the G80 M3. I think it's an excellent evolution from the F80 that it followed. These nice wraparound, aggressive looking LED taillights with a more blacked out lens look beautiful. You've got the aggressive quad exhaust coming out through the all black diffuser. So since we're back here talking about the exhaust, let's have a listen and see what it sounds both with the active valves closed and the valves opened on the exhaust. It really sets up a nice look with the small black chin lip spoiler. Just really looks good. So the back styling and the side styling on this car I think are excellent, as well as the carbon fiber roof. It's just the front end that I'm not so big a fan of, and it just really hasn't grown on me yet. Let's talk a little bit about the interior. So I'm a huge fan of the Silverstone color interior that our car was actually spec'd with. I think it looks great, especially with the darker colored exterior. And then you've got the black perforated stripe that comes up the middle here. Huge fan of this interior color. The only thing I could do if I would change it was I might consider going with the sport buckets. Now I know that's a huge topic of discussion when it comes to this car. Although these seats are a ton more comfortable than the sport buckets just really fit the more aggressive exterior of this car. Now I'm going to go over the whole build sheet here in a second, but our car is equipped with the carbon fiber interior trim. So you've got the carbon fiber here around the steering wheel, and you also have the carbon fiber on the center console that kind of runs up over the cup holder here and across the exterior side there. I really think that looks excellent on the interior. Now let's talk about some of the features on the inside. So the G80 chassis has the digital instrument cluster. They actually placed the start button here on the center console, which takes a little bit of getting used to if you're used to reaching up here on the column to press it. But the digital cluster is somewhat configurable. There's a few things you can change, like these menus here on the right-hand side. You can kind of cycle through. You can see your range, you can see your tire pressure, and also tire temperature, which I think is a great feature if you plan on taking your G80 to the track. And then pressing this button down here, which says M mode, is kind of interesting, but that is actually what cycles through your instrument cluster. It's not exactly an M mode. The M mode is configured more so from these buttons here on the steering wheel. Now this is something they introduced a few generations ago on M cars, and it's probably one of the most handy features. The way I have mine set up is that pressing this M1 button actually opens the valves on the exhaust, and I can actually show you the configuration here for my M mode so you can see exactly what that does. So my first M button is going to modify the engine to be in Sport Plus. I have the gear assist on, which what that is, that's rev matching for when you're doing your downshifts. I've got the suspension on Sport, which is the middle setting here for stiffness. And then I've got my steering on Comfort, brakes on Comfort, and then the traction control in the on configuration. So all of those options that I prefer for daily driving are under the M1 button. The M2 button I have configured more so to an aggressive setup. Now, not so much for the track, because we don't take our car to the track, but just for doing some pulls or something like that. We have the engine in Sport Plus. We have the gear assist still on. Chassis we have in Sport Plus, the most stiff configuration for the suspension. Steering in Sport, which is the most aggressive setting for the steering. And then brake in Sport. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the steering, because that's kind of a topic of discussion on the G80 M3 when we actually get out and drive the car. Personally, I don't think it's that bad, but I'll touch a little bit more on it once we actually start driving. So going through some of the other features in the interior, you do have physical buttons for most of your controls in here. Like you have a physical button for the heated seats, which I think is actually pretty ingenious. When I first got the car, I knew it had ventilated seats, but I almost thought it didn't have heated seats because it almost doesn't look like there's a button for it. But if you hit the button here, it actually pulls up on the infotainment and allows you to adjust the level of ventilation or the level of heat, and you can have them both on at the same time, although I don't see much reason behind that. You can also set the seat heating or seat ventilation to come on depending on the exterior temperature. You can have them come on automatically. I have noticed that when you have seat ventilation on, if you power the car off and turn it back on, it tends to come on automatically. So the ventilated seats, super nice. That's an option on the car. I'm actually going to go over the original window sticker here and some of the options that are on the car so you can see how ours is equipped. So looking at the original window sticker for our 21 M3, the base price of the car was $69,900. Now I know that's a little bit higher on the 24 models, but that's what it was in 2021. As far as options, we have the Dravit Gray Metallic exterior, which is about a $1,950 option. And then we have the Silverstone leather interior package, which is actually no extra charge. The executive package is about $2,800. That includes the heated steering wheel, powered trunk, the Icon adaptive LED headlights with laser lights, commonly referred to as just laser lights, the heads-up display, the wireless charger that sits underneath here, gesture control for the infotainment system, which is actually a pretty cool feature. By spinning your finger here, you can turn the volume up, or rotating your finger counterclockwise will turn the volume down, whereas a throw to the right might change the song, as you can see there. I've actually found it to be pretty intuitive. A lot of times I do end up just using the controls here, which when I use this button, it actually just pops up in the heads-up display, which you probably can't see very well on camera. So those are all the things included in the executive package. Our car, as I showed when I walked around the outside, has the optional 19-inch and 20-inch black wheels, which are the 826Ms. Those are about a $1,300 option. Front ventilated seats, as I just talked about, $350 option. And then you had destination charge, which was about $995. Brought the total MSRP on the car to $78,245. Now, while this is up significantly from previous generations in the F80 M3, I was actually able to buy a pretty heavily optioned M Performance Package edition of the Comp M3 when I had my F80 in 2018, and it was only about an 81 MSRP for the Comp, whereas the Comp and the all-wheel drive versions of this car can easily set you back well into the 90s in terms of overall price. Now, the touchscreen infotainment screen here I have found to be very intuitive, has lots of different features. You can actually go in here and, like many of the previous M3s, you can see your sport display, which will tell you how much PSI of boost you're currently making, what your oil temps are, what your pound-feet of torque and your horsepower figures are. I think that's a cool gadget to kind of show folks. And then there's also an accelerometer here in the middle, so you can mark your G-forces. Now, I don't have the M lap timer option, which will give you a lot more information and drift scores and things like that, but I'm sure you can find another video that'll kind of show you what's included in that in case that's something that you want to explore on the car. Also, Android Auto and Apple CarPlay standard in wireless configuration. So don't have my phone plugged in right now to be able to use Android Auto in a wireless form. Now, Google Maps is wonderful on this setup. It looks great, it's super responsive, and I've been very happy with it so far in its functionality. Now, the screen is a little bit small on the 2021 and 2022 G80s compared to a lot of other cars that are on the market and some of its competition. They've actually made the display a little bit bigger from 2023 moving forward on the G80 chassis. Personally, I think this is fine. I have absolutely no need for a bigger screen like what I had in my 2023 Raptor was a huge screen. Screens are getting larger and larger. In my opinion, it doesn't really offer much to the driving experience at all, and that's not really why you buy one of these cars. Of course, the infotainment screen can be controlled from the iDrive controller that you've seen in many previous BMWs. Super intuitive. You can actually write on it here and it will respond on the screen. So with no further ado, and I'm sure I missed a couple things, but we went over a lot of the features on the inside as far as things that might be unique to this car. Of course, it's got many other features that almost every other car has. Let's get this thing out on the road, drive it, and talk about what we think driving the G80 M3 and really what makes it, in my opinion, the best sports sedan on the market in 2024. All right, you ready, babe?
Ready.
All right, so we're gonna do the drive and kind of the ownership experience so far on the G80 M3 with the 6-speed manual. So kind of want to start with the daily stuff like practicality. Car's pretty practical, honestly. That's why we went with a G80 over a G82. You have 4 doors, you can seat 5 people, well really 4 people comfortably because that back middle seat is kind of narrow. But for just 2 adults in the back, it's actually pretty comfortable, decent leg room. Somebody that's even as tall as me, 6'3", can sit back there without too many issues. Trunk storage space is pretty good. Those seats do fold down, give you extra room to put stuff in the trunk. So from a practicality standpoint, pretty decent. Fuel economy is also pretty good. Since we've had the car, we've been able to get a true average of 24 miles to the gallon, but on most of the commutes it does, you know, 28, 29 miles to the gallon on my way to work. Obviously it's lower than that because there's a few pulls every now and then that obviously greatly decrease the total fuel economy. So fuel economy is good, decent storage space in it. Obviously cost of ownership is a factor in these things. Oil changes and whatnot are not inexpensive for sure. So there's definitely some upkeep, especially if you bring it to BMW for service and things like that. Living with the car is not bad. Suspension is a little bit stiff, especially with those kind of lower profile tires that we showed you, the 19 and the 20-inch wheels. So relatively little cushion in the sidewall as far as making it a comfortable ride. The thing I wanted to address that I talked about earlier in the video, the steering. So obviously that's a factor. This is an electric hydraulic steering rack. So it's an electric power assisted hydraulic steering rack. So it has somewhat the feel of a more hydraulic steering rack like M cars of yesteryear, but it definitely is a little bit more responsive. Now, with that, it is a little bit numb. I'm sure you've heard that before if you've done much research on these cars. You don't get a ton of road feel or feedback from the steering wheel, which isn't always a bad thing. I guess it's just a matter of preference. From a drivability standpoint, it might almost be better to have a little bit of road feel. If you're tracking it or something like that, then you probably care a little bit more about that. I don't think the steering is too bad. I showed you the M modes earlier. I usually drive it in the comfort mode for the steering, so it does make the steering super light, like I'm driving a Cadillac or something like that, even though the Cadillac, the AT4, or the ATS-V 4 and 5, they actually have, or CT, I don't know why I said AT, the CT4V and CT5V, they have a little bit better steering from what I've heard, but they certainly don't have this motor, and that's what makes this car shine. The S58 is amazing. It always likes to stay in the power band. It's super responsive. Like we got this Mustang pulling up on us right now.
He wants to.
He's not even looking at us.
It's an old man.
Yeah.
Like, whatever.
Yeah, we're not even being fair. We're pulling on a 2002 Mustang GT right now with his 240 horsepower, 190 horsepower at the tire. But no, super responsive. The 6-speed manual is great. It's basically a short shifter in it, so the shifts are super smooth and super crisp. The clutch is pretty light, which takes a little bit of getting used to, but the engagement is really good. It's actually awesome to have the computer help you assist if you're not super comfortable with driving manual, like teaching Aaliyah on this car versus on the E46 M3 with none of those assists. It's obviously a lot easier to drive. And then obviously those rev matched downshifts, which you can probably hear. It rev matches very well, even up to like 5,000 RPM, which that was rolling up to this stop here. So drivability wise, manual transmission is great. Now, if I was gonna buy another one of these, for what I used the car for, this was the daily driver for about 6 months, I would strongly consider getting the automatic transmission and probably an all-wheel drive comp, even though they're a lot more money. And the only reason I say that, because I think this is the better car. I like driving this better, but if you're going to drive it a lot, the automatic is nice because the manual is a little bit of a burden. I don't have active cruise control or any of those kind of features that I really enjoy, like when I'm driving the F10 or the E90. So that's something to keep in mind if you're just going to be cruising mostly in it and you want to look good and you want to be able to, you know, hit it every now and then if you want to. The competition might be better in that respect. Now, I think resale wise, if you go a couple years down the road, I think you're going to do better with the manual, because I think that this is the absolute last M3 with a manual transmission. And I know BMW hasn't confirmed that. I don't think they're going to confirm that until it's just basically smacks us in the face and they say, hey, automatics only. I mean, obviously they've done that with many of the other cars. You can't get the current generation or the upcoming new generation, obviously, of M5 with a manual transmission. If they go to a more hybrid setup, which is I'm almost sure what they're going to do, like they've done with the C63 AMG, obviously that's going to keep them from being able to use a manual transmission. Those systems don't really work together well if they're putting an electric motor on the transmission. So I think that this is definitely the way to go. The other thing I want to talk about, the reason why I think this is really, really a good buy, there is no BMW that has lower depreciation than a G80 M3 right now, as far as something you could go buy new off the lot. I mean, look at any of the other M cars. Well, anything that's not an M car, forget it. You know, go buy a new X5 or a new 7 Series and you'll lose half of the value in the first year that you own it. You know, your $150,000 car will be worth 75 grand after a year. So that's obvious. But the other M cars, I mean, M5s, they depreciate pretty heavily in comparison to these. I've had one before. I think it's $1 a mile of depreciation. So drive that thing 50,000 miles, you just cost yourself 50,000 bucks. Now, while the G80 obviously still depreciates because it is a BMW, I just don't think it depreciates as badly. An excellent example of that is, think about like an M8 comp or something like that, where MSRP is 150, 160, but a year old M8 is probably, you know, not a year old, let's call it 2 or 3 years old like this car is probably 75 to 85 grand. So they've lost almost half of their MSRP, where these cars might only lose 5, 10, 15 grand in that first 2 years. So obviously still depreciating, but I think as far as best value for your money and what you're going to get back out of it when you go to get rid of it, I mean, that's just this car, plain and simple. So, and that's kind of what drew me to it. I lost a lot of money on the F90. Not that I didn't expect to, but obviously lost a lot of money on that car, especially since it was kind of the height of COVID when we drove out to Louisville and bought that car. So a lot of depreciation there, and I think that you're going to be better off this route. Driving this car, it just puts a smile on your face every single time you jump into it. I mean, they're just incredible cars to drive. They're super comfortable. They get looks pretty much everywhere you go. For the most part, it's fairly practical. My insurance isn't that crazy. And then you can just rip it every now and then. Good thing we're in Guatemala right now, because we just slightly exceeded the
Guatemala.
Yeah, slightly exceeded the recommended speed limit here. But yeah, I mean, it just rips. You know, you're gonna notice obviously from a dig, you're gonna get smacked by you know, an all-wheel drive automatic transmission car. But from a roll, especially if you catch somebody sleeping that doesn't know what they're doing, I mean, you're gonna tear up a lot of stuff out there on the street with this thing. And you got a back seat. You can get almost 30 miles to the gallon. I mean, how do you friggin' beat it? It looks amazing. Gas mileage is fairly good. They're not all that expensive. I mean, God, you could pay this much for a new Mustang Dark Horse, which it would be absurd to buy that over this, but if that's what you like, that's great. More power to you. I'm obviously all for you getting whatever you like in your car, but I just think this is the best buy going into 2024. Aaliyah, do you have anything that you like about the car that you want to share? What's your favorite thing about the G80 M3 before we let these guys go?
Sounds really good, and we rarely lose any races.
We rarely lose races, but I'll leave you with this before we go. Picking this thing up from the dealership, we took on a ZL1 Camaro that whether it was stock or not, ZL1s are fast in stock configuration, obviously had a lot of cosmetic work done to it. We got smacked up, you know, the first time in the car, we got decimated. But for the most part, I mean, it's going to rip up, you know, most everything you're going to encounter.
Everything else.
Yeah, it's a great practical daily driver. I mean, in most stock cars, I guess I should say, on the road, obviously you can mod stuff out to be pretty quick, but it rips, you know, it does really good. And I think the camera actually just got tipped up from that pole right there. But thank you guys so much for watching the video. Hopefully you liked it. Hopefully it gave you some,
subscribe.
Hopefully it gave you some insight if you're thinking about buying one. And bye, thanks for watching.